Welcome to our third Connecting Conversations interview session, and we're pleased to be joined by a good friend of mine, Anjali, who's currently a master's student at UCL. So today's conversation is all about highlighting, highlighting conversations within education and how diversity exists within the education space, and hearing from an amazing student who's studying their master's, who's gone through different parts of their journey throughout the education system in order for us to bring to life what that looks like, and hear it from someone who's done it and who's still going through it, and giving us an idea of what's happening in the education space around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So welcome, Anjali. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Volker. Thank you for having me. It's great.
Well, we won't be too harsh on you today, but before we even get into our conversation, how would you like to identify or describe yourself to our audience today?
Yeah, so identify with the pronouns she and her. And my name is Anjali, but you can also call me Ange. There's a long story short about that. Often people find it easier to say Ange. Mm-hmm. So it's there just for the options, and whatever you prefer. And I obviously don't mind both, but those are my pronouns and that's my name.
Thank you. And can you give us a bit of a flavor about what you're studying and why you have decided to study this particular subject?
Sure. So I'm a speech and language therapy student, and I'm a master's student at UCL. So speech and language therapy, I mean, I don't know if anyone's really heard of what speech and language therapy is unless you probably might have children, or you work within the healthcare profession, or you've experienced it yourself, or you know someone that's going through it, or you know a close family friend or someone you know quite close to you, or even through the introduction through somebody else saying, this person had speech and language therapy that I know about. And often the questions arise are, what's speech and language therapy? Are you going to teach me how to speak? That's a question that really gets to me, because speech and language therapy isn't always about teaching someone how to speak. What it is all about speech, language, and your communication, and they're three different domains. And what people don't know is that speech language therapists also focus on eating, drinking, and swallowing disorders. That's also within the younger population, ranging from babies from birth right up until adulthood, as long as you live, really, and where you need the therapy input. So essentially that's what a speech and language therapist is. Why speech and language therapy? So I did an undergraduate in psychology. Why psychology? I don't know, but that's where my path led me after sixth form. And I think it was just coming across different research papers, and I think really just talking to different people at the university, different scopes and routes. And I always knew that I wanted to do a master's in something and increase my education and scope in education. And I came across speech and language therapy through speaking to my personal tutor in my final year. And I just did a bit more research, and I currently know a couple of family and friends that also have had speech and language therapy. You just get talking to people. And then you start doing the Google search, and then you think, this is interesting. I'd quite like to do this. And then you think, I don't know any speech and language therapists, and it kind of makes you unique in a way, because no one in my family is a speech and language therapist. None of my friends outside of the university course are speech and language therapists. So it creates a nice little opening for discussion as well, which I think is a great I think it's a great opportunity to, if you can study it, I would always promote it. A bit biased. But yeah, I worked in a mainstream school
Mhm.
after I graduated from my undergrad.
Yeah.
And I worked with a range of different individuals with speech and language difficulties. I worked in a resource-based unit in a mainstream
Mm.
school.
Okay.
So there's a lot of children that have ASD, ADHD, learning
Mhm.
disabilities,
Mm.
and a lot of those do co-occur with speech and language disorders alongside.
Mm. Mhm.
And really, that's where my interest really stemmed to thinking, I'm going to apply for the course
Yeah.
and really get into that. It's an NHS course, so it's very competitive.
Mm.
Competitive being why a lot of the NHS courses are funded
Yeah.
through student loan and the NHS themselves, which is why it's also very hard to get in. And obviously these courses are looking for the best of the best, plus lots of experience. So yeah, the journey to getting onto the course and being in UCL takes a lot of hard work, perseverance to
Mhm.
gain that experience, to really understand why you want to do it, because it becomes really obvious once you're in the course
Yeah.
who really wants to be here, why do you want to be here, and
Mm.
who's the one that's really motivated to be on the
Mm.
course, to really complete it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
um, yeah, so that's how my journey started out, and I'm a year into the course. It's a 2 years course, so I've had a year of experience of studying as a speech and language therapy student. So that's a bit of my background and what we do, and what we really are. We
Yeah.
are ultimately therapists, and we do get a nice little professional role at the end of it.
That's amazing. And I think, a lot of people, I for sure didn't think that that was a career path until you went down that route. Um, and there's a lot of people that I'm sure who who is curious about and navigating that space and wanting to do something a little bit different, but also something that is that isn't quite talked about within the NHS space as much as other kind of avenues to venture into. But I guess there are a couple of things that you touched upon, and one thing is, it is a form of disability with speech language therapists. And I think sometimes when you look at disability as a whole, we only focus on, the very physical abilities, some of the invisible, such as mental health, but not many people really talk about speech language therapy, or what that consists of, or even that it's connected to conditions like ADHD. So I think that's very eye-opening for some people to understand and be familiar with. But also, as a student, it is a very competitive space, and I find that a little bit contradictory because the NHS is calling for more and more staff across the board. But it's interesting to know that there is the opportunity there for people, and there is a lot of hard work that has to go behind it. Um, so with that being said, tell us a little, and I would love to get more into speech and language therapists in a second. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about your journey as a student studying an NHS course. Has it been eye-opening? Has it been something new? Um, how how have you felt as as someone from a different community going into that a white predominant space, shall we say? Tell us a little bit about your journey during this course.
So I must say that it took me 3 times to apply before getting into the course. So that obviously says a lot about the selection process
Mm.
and what universities nowadays really are looking for.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, the driving force behind these applications was always experience, but you question what else goes on in the backgrounds
Mm.
of the application process, because when you do the process, they're asking you to declare a lot of things, such as your ethnic background, parental educational history, and but it's quite unknown how people actually get onto the course. So it will be quite interesting, maybe to see further on in the future what happens in the background to actually get onto a course, specifically an NHS course. I can say at the moment I'm probably one of a couple of students with an ethnic minority background, so I'm a British Indian on the course. There's only a couple of us on the course that are of ethnic backgrounds, but that also could be just down to people not knowing about the course, or but I'm assuming people do get a lot of applications in for the university, so it's interesting how the selection's done. As a student speech and language therapist, there's been many great opportunities. So I've been able to work in a special needs school, at Great Ormond Street Hospital, at the National Hospital of Neurology. So all these experiences all together were all NHS experiences, working as a speech and language therapist, and working within the teams that I've seen. It's very interesting. I've still been one of the minority ethnic backgrounds on the team, which I think is quite shocking as well, but also not at the same time, because I think, it's quite expected that when you are of an ethnic minority background, you go in and you think, oh, I wonder who else is on the team that maybe I could relate to, or, obviously being professional, you work holistically with everyone. But I think always in the back of your mind, you always think, oh, I wonder who's in that work team, if it's diverse. Is it a 50-50 split between males and females? And what I've seen quite often within the course is majority females, speech and language therapists. I've not come across one male speech and language therapist on my experiences and opportunities outside of my course, which is also quite shocking. I mean, it's quite like, if you compare it to teachers, you see a lot of female primary school teachers, but I think as the years are going on, you start to see a bit of a merge between the two. But I think there's a long way to go with that, and especially within a lot of career paths.
With that being said, shall we now start to wonder what kind of promotion of the courses out there to gain more diverse audience, both from a female and male background, but also from all ethnic and all communities? Would you say that's something that they need to do more of? Because certainly from my perspective, I've never heard of speech language therapists, and I didn't even know that that was a field that I could perhaps go into. So do you think it's the exposure, or is it because the department is quite small itself, or is it new?
That is quite interesting. You've got quite a lot of interesting discussion points. I think for me, the main concerns are the lack of diversity within the workforce. So within the recruitment process specifically, but also it's always down to skill, how skilled you are, how qualified you are, and we really need a push and a force to bring out these skills, which requires a lot of effort. So that being said, the speech and language therapy teams usually are quite small within the hospitals, within schools, and I think it is really down to like the recruitment, and where do you go from there? The course itself this course specifically only has 60 people. Other universities only employ 10 people onto the course, so it's a real difference. It's because it's very, very specialized. The further and further you train as well, it's also where the lack of diversity probably comes in to the workforce, where opportunities may not be created, people are happy where they are. I mean, there's always development for training on this course, many specialisms. So I think really, I don't know if there's a panel that within the team that can push more diversity and inclusion into this area. I mean, speaking from a personal experience, for example, I've seen someone along my journey, and some of the things and the items that we use for therapy are not always culturally appropriate. But having said that, if I wasn't there, would that have been recognised? Maybe would it have been brought up for discussion? That's in terms of like play therapy, maybe like the animals you use or the way you introduce things could be culturally different to how someone else might introduce something, or how you might interact with certain types of things. And onto like the eating, drinking, swallowing aspects. People eat with their hands in certain cultures, and maybe, you know, that's not always recognised. Speech and language therapists might go in like with a spoon, and you know, that might not be the first thought of how that family might teach their children how to eat. You know, I mean, with us typically, well, with me, like we use our hands to eat some foods, and you know, we use spoons as well, but generally we use our hands to eat, and it's quite common across a lot of cultures. But within a therapy setting, was that considered? Maybe not, if I wasn't there, or maybe it would have been spoken about. But a lot of that comes from integration of family history, case taking, and that has to be done very thoroughly in order to get a good perspective of the client, and using that information that can be implemented holistically with the aspects of inclusion, diversity. But you know, from that personal experience, if I wasn't there, I don't know if that would have been brought up. But I think it is always good. It creates good opportunities for discussion. Limits conscious bias, unconscious bias, which I think is really big at the moment in a lot of workforce places, and especially within the NHS itself. The level of care and treatment as well, that can also be done through unconscious bias, and it's quite sad. But you know, I think having a more diverse inclusion within this field would create so many more eye-opening opportunities for training, especially. I mean, for me personally, diversity and inclusion, everyone should be included, all aspects, cultures. There's a whole list that I can't think of right now, but you know, there's just so much. It includes everyone, and everyone's differences, and I think that's a really important driving force for inclusion and diversity, really, because I don't know about you, Avelka, but a lot of companies are tick boxing. What about the other topics and all the other themes that could be discussed,
and the intersectionality as well that comes with it? Exactly. You know, someone could have a disability or speech disorder, but still be, you know, part of that community, or they could still be from a Black community. So I think it's also the intersectionality of that should be recognized.
Yeah, and I think a lot of individuals don't really speak about their speech and language disorders, or delayed, because it creates a sort of stereotypical question of, oh, so you can't speak, or oh, you can't do this. But there's more to it. There's a lot more to it, and I think, you know, training for speech and language therapy and disorders and what they are within different workforces can also promote more inclusion, which is something I'm probably hoping to do at some point in the future. You know, training schools, training workforce places, especially in the corporate business world. You know, it's great, we've got all these things, but has your company considered this? And I think that's a nice stepping stone into opening opportunities for loads of individuals to become more comfortable in making applications. But yeah, that being said, a lot of our therapy is now also tailored to the client. So because of the pandemic, a lot of our therapy sessions are done online. So that's a nice little way of inclusion as well, because, you know, some people who may have a physical disability may not always be able to come into a clinic or come into sessions weekly, or, and having the option to do therapy online is great, but also what else could be done? There's a lot more, and who would have thought Zoom would have been the best way to communicate with individuals? But hey ho, we're here. But I'm sure there's more leading platforms that are on their way into making inclusion diversity great for individuals with speech and language disorders. I think there's loads of discussion points.
And to be honest, you hit quite a few of them, and one that resonates with me is when you discuss how that organizations should have more consideration towards a topic, because we talk about disability, especially in the corporate world. There's a lot of talk about having more accessible resources, being disability confident. There is accreditations for organizations to become disability confident and leaders, but I personally haven't went down that field or saw anything that gave exposure, shall I say, to speech language therapy, and the different conditions or disorders, if you can say, that contribute to that. So I think that's really important for us to be very aware of what that would look like and how accessible we should be making, recruitment, our day-to-day roles in our organizations and things like that. And I think another thing that you touched upon that also resonates with me is the fact that, it's not just one bit or one community. We're serving all communities, the intersectionality of it. And all of that contributes to care and how we provide for, as you say, your clients when you're working with them. Being very aware of the cultural dimensions or kind of, the cultural dimensions and the social dimensions that they're within and how you communicate with them on that level. So when you touched upon the fact that certain tools or methods haven't been, I guess, acknowledged for certain groups of people, I think that's quite eye-opening, because in my head, if we have a more diverse workforce, we will be able to, cater and treat people in the right way and in a way that is culturally and socially appropriate for their understanding to help them with their development. But as a result of that, shall I say, how from even witnessing and experiencing that instance, does that have a real impact on the client?
Do you know what, Avelka? Those points you brought up are great, because at the moment I'm working with a couple of individuals that have had a stroke, and as a result, they've developed a condition called aphasia. So aphasia is long-term and life-changing condition, which is used to describe a language disorder as a result to a damage in the brain that is important for some of the language areas. So our brain is formulated with different areas, and each area is responsible for your expressive language, and areas of the brain are responsible for your comprehension, so how you would understand language. But yeah, as a result, they've now got a language disorder because of their stroke. And we work together collaboratively to set goals on what's important to them. And the most common theme that's developed from this stroke group is employment and coming back into work. So a lot of the members in the group are, quite young, I would say, for their age. Because of confidentiality, I won't mention age. But from my perspective, and the common theme is, the first thing they would say, I want to get back into work. I want to be able to use Excel. I want to be able to do this. I want people to be able to understand me, and I want to be able to communicate. I want to be able to lead. I want to be able to do all those things that they did before their stroke. And ultimately, they're finding it really difficult to go back into roles that did require a lot of language, and they're being offered alternative roles, which is not something they're interested in. And I would think, why should they be offered an alternative role? What can be done to make adjustments within the workforce where they can do something to help the stepping stones of maybe doing something for that particular job? So some of them are more than capable of implementing data into an Excel spreadsheet. That would help the workforce. But you know, why is that not done? Why are these jobs not considered for people, for adults that have an acquired disorder? So it you know, that's where inclusion and diversity can really be implemented. Why should they be offered just, I don't know, working in a supermarket? I mean, great, I work in a supermarket on the weekends as my part-time job, but for people who were, for example, maybe in the tech industry, why should they be offered something to do in the supermarket where they're just filling shelves, and you know, that doesn't really fulfill their goals? Where's the middle ground between the two on the spectrum? And it's a shame that I don't know any workplaces at the moment that have jobs for people that have had a stroke and, you know, as a result has speech and language because of it.
And I think, you know, and I've spoken to people with physical and visual impairments before, and one of their biggest things is having to declare that on the recruitment form. You know, a lot of people, and you know, even people from different underrepresented groups, they fear filling out certain details because they're under the impression that that's going to have a huge impact on their applications. And don't get me wrong, in some cases that can be that may be the case. In other cases that may not be, you know, depending on the organization structure and systems that are in place to make sure that data isn't visible. But I think, you know, from speaking to some people with a disability, they don't want to say that, you know, and they fear even asking for reasonable adjustments because it might seem like an additional ask or task for the business to kind of accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that workplaces have adjustments and reasonable adjustments, but I think workplaces at the moment need to make more of a difference in making jobs available for people that are more than capable of doing. Just providing their given time, their understanding about the conditions, and not just the recruitment individuals, but the workforce team itself. So the people they'll be working closely with. I think a lot can be done, and you know, I'm really hoping, I don't know, maybe in the future that is something that we can implement. As speech and language therapy individuals, therapists, future therapists. But it is really all about advocacy as well, you know, speaking up for those individuals. There's loads of great charities out there that, you know, that are advocating for these individuals, but I think more can be done with that, and that mainly does come from, you know, the role as a speech and language therapist. Advocacy for me is like top priority. You know,
and just going back as well, because if we then decide to put these measures in place and allow these individuals the opportunity to succeed, what would that mean for that individual from your conversations with them?
It would honestly mean the world, to put it in short form. I mean, it's the fact that someone's able to, you know, give them that boost that, you know, you can do this, and why should you be limited? Why should they be limited of opportunities? And I think that's the biggest one, opportunity. It's the fact that people see them as people and not just someone with a speech and language disorder, or someone that's had a stroke, or someone who's, they've got aphasia, or, you know, it's I'm an individual, I'm human, I have as much right to be here as everybody else.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I said, for me, priority is diversity within the workforce, and that's across all domains.
Yeah.
And it's a big must at the moment. And I think a lot of companies are trying to incorporate that. But I think a lot more needs to be done. But obviously, that's where companies like you can come in and really work on that as well.
Yeah. No, certainly. And I think, for us at Cohesia Connect, it's about bringing that authenticity to these people and really hearing their stories and, getting in a deep dive into what life is like for them and how can we put measures in place to support them on their journeys and to educate other people about their journeys. That's what these interviews are for us to spotlight on, people that who haven't had the voice to come forward or who haven't experienced, you know, certain things, and we want to be able to bring these conversations to the forefront to educate, to inspire, to motivate all those who really want to advocate, like you say, and bring these conversations to life and make a change, a sustainable change. So that's what we hope. That's our hope for Cohesia Connect. That's our hope for um, the world today, to really change for the better and give everyone the opportunity that they deserve. Last week we had a gentleman who talked about equal opportunity, specifically from those entering the engineering space. So it's all about giving everyone equal opportunity, but also having equity in place. So such as those reasonable adjustments to level the playing field for those that can't compete with other situations. But my final question to you is, what would you like to see happen or change within the NHS industry? Um, but on the other side of that, even in your course, what do you think, or what would you like to see happen within the course that you're studying?
That's a really good question. Obviously, I don't know what goes on behind the recruitment process. Um, but I think a lot more needs to be taken into consideration of backgrounds that can help the inclusion and diversity within the course, because ultimately the more people that do the course that are from that tick box, the inclusion diversity parts of the application form.
The different characteristics.
Yeah, the characteristics. The more and more they recruit onto the course, the more and more therapists they'll end up having, which would create a knock-on effect with the diversity within the population of speech and language therapists. It may just be that I haven't come across a lot of individuals, but I've been on quite a few placements and experiences in lots of jobs that, I think maybe it's just the early starting stages of my career and I haven't really gone into, the bigger world out there yet. But from what I've seen, that would obviously be, I think, where the change should start. Really from the process of employing people onto the course, ultimately having a knock-on effect on how many therapists are out there. And changes within the NHS specifically, I don't think I can comment about because I haven't had that much NHS experience. But I think ultimately the impact would start once more and more therapists are qualified. And, I think a lot more training can be implemented within a lot of workforces. Also saying that, I think it's also important not to train, but to educate maybe students as well in schools. Because a lot of the differences and people start feeling like the odd one out stems from schools really as well, especially in secondary schools. That's where you want to create your identity, educating others on these different aspects of
Yeah.
diversity and what they can include,
Mm.
and also training a lot more individuals overall, and making more regular training sessions, making them holistic, talking about different topics, themes, across all domains. But given and taking time, I don't know how feasible that is for companies, but you know, I think a lot more could be done in that aspect.
Yeah, and we will get there, I hope, at some point. But essentially the point, and you've made a valid point, in order to see that domino effect in the NHS and, you know, having a wide range and a wide diverse workforce within speech language therapy, we'll be able to serve the communities that need it the most and who do have these disorders or who develop them later on due to certain situations. So I think there is that domino effect later on, but it all starts from, you know, having more exposure at the start. You know, how do we get more students studying the topic? How do we educate more people? You know, where do we advertise our roles perhaps? Are we just getting the same type of people and therefore regenerating the same type of skills that potentially won't move? How's the recruitment process set up? Is it even inclusive? You know, really looking at that front end in order to have that domino effect later on and be a force for change and be a support for those individuals that need the care that they require. So thank you, Ange, for this informative discussion. And I'm sure there are people in our audience who are thinking, I've never heard of speech language therapy before, but I'm definitely going to look into it now.
Well, I hope so.
So hopefully, you know, someone has been inspired by your conversation and, you know, at least had an insight into your journey as a student and what's that like, but also, you know, into the pathway of speech language therapy and how that could serve, you know, all of the communities that we want to, not that we want, but all the communities that that are needed out there. So thank you so much for the discussion.
No, I mean, it does really hit a diverse population, so
there we go. So, you know, I think a lot of this conversation and, you know, how it is geared is to support more diverse populations who therefore develops these conditions or, you know, were born with these conditions. So we need to have a very holistic, diverse, inclusive way of reaching those people, of engaging with those communities, and therefore giving them the best support that is needed. So thank you so much, and
thank you, Adelka, for having me.
Take care.
Take care. See you later. Bye.